الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم وعلى آله واصحابه ومن استنى بالسنة إلى يوم الدين. Alhamdulillah, all praise due to Allah, and may Allah's peace and blessings be on His last Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and on all those who follow the path of righteousness until the last day. In our previous lecture, we completed the fundamentals of hadith methodology, and we now go on to usul al-fiqh, or the fundamentals of Islamic law. And as I explained in the very beginning, all of these topics that we have taken so far are all interrelated. The foundation of Islam is aqeedah, is belief in Allah, tawheed, and information about Allah comes to us primarily from the Quran. So we studied tafsir. But the Quran cannot be understood without resorting to the explanations of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. For it to be properly understood, we must go to the Sunnah. And we said that the Sunnah was conveyed to us in the Hadith. The Hadith is the container for the Sunnah. Therefore, we studied the science of Hadith. And then when we discussed the principles of tafsir, and we talked about understanding the Quran in its context as explained in the Sunnah by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, as further clarified to us by his companions who lived the revelation, and resorting to Arabic language, and that is classical Arabic language, where there remained bits and pieces which were not specifically clarified by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ nor by his companions. And after that we said we use our opinion to apply the Quran to our daily lives. And the application of the Quran and the Sunnah to our daily lives, this is what is known as fiqh. Fiqh, Islamic law. And that's why we now begin the study of Islamic law. So there is a progression here. Though we have studied 3 other topics, and this is the 4th of the major topics, they are all interrelated. One builds on the other. They combine to form the 4th. Islamic law. The term Islamic law has been used as a translation for both the term fiqh, which I mentioned, as well as the term sharia. But to the specialists, they are not synonymous. To the non-specialist, they would appear to be synonymous. If we translate sharia as Islamic law, fiqh as Islamic law, then sharia must be the same as fiqh. But the fact of the matter is that they're not. The sharia translated into English is the water hole, or the straight path. Fiqh is understanding, a deep understanding, as Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, مَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Whomsoever Allah wishes for that individual good, he gives him a deep understanding of the religion. This is the fiqh. So, having understood it from a linguistic point of view, what is intended by Sharia is Islamic law as contained in revelation. Meaning, Islamic law as it is contained in the Quran and the Sunnah. This constitutes Sharia. Whereas the human understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah and its application in daily life, this is now what we call fiqh. So fiqh, we could call it applied Islamic law, because it will rely on the Quran and Sunnah, but human understanding is there. Whereas Sharia is divine revelation. Human understanding has no place there. So if we look at fiqh and Sharia, we can find that there are basically three differences between the two. First and foremost, Sharia is based on divine revelation. Fiqh is based on human understanding. Secondly, Sharia, because it is based on divine revelation, the laws of Sharia are fixed. They are fixed, unchangeable. Whereas the laws of fiqh, because they are deduced from human understanding, they are flexible. They can change. Thirdly, a point of content. The laws of Sharia in general tend to be general, whereas the laws of fiqh tend to be very detailed and very specific. Why? Because the human circumstances which would arise in our daily lives are so many. The rulings that have to be deduced for all of the circumstances of our lives then become varied, you know. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to address each and every little change and difference that takes place in human lives in the Quran, in detail, in specific, we would end up with an encyclopedia of 40 or 50 volumes, which would make the Quran very impractical. You couldn't take it around with you. Memorizing it now would become a real challenge. So for practical purposes, the essence of the revelation was preserved in a basic text, which spoke about the general principles. Clarification of those principles and additional general principles was provided by the Sunnah. But now, applying it to each and every change in human life, that is now left up to human beings. And this is where the test of life comes. After you have understood what the Quran and the Sunnah has to say, will you apply it? This is your test. And when we look, as we said, at the basic foundation of the Islamic legal system, we can say it is based on Quran and Sunnah on one hand, and it's based on human understanding on the other hand. These are combined. And what is important for us to deduce or to take from this difference is the da'wah point. That when non-Muslims raise the question, how in the world can you Muslims dare to suggest that you want to rule your lives and the lives of your countries by a legal system revealed 1,400 years ago? How could you possibly suggest this? This is insane. How could you possibly imagine that it could be applicable today? Why? Because when they look at their own legal systems, the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Rights, the American Constitution, the various documents that have been produced, in the last 500 years, less than 500 years, 200 years. They, though on one hand may contain certain good principles which we can accept today, they also contain grave errors, like that famous error in the American Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, where it was referred to as the 3/5 compromise, right? Where black Americans were to be considered, according to the American Constitution, 1776, put together by the best and most liberated minds of that time. Black Americans were to be considered as 3/5 of white Americans. That is enshrined in the Constitution. You can make your pilgrimage to Washington and go and see it there, written in the document. Right? So this obvious racist, oppressive principle was incorporated in a document which was to guide, the society's life, etc. So they could see that. And if you go to the Magna Carta, you go to the other documents produced in Europe, in France, in Germany, in England, etc., you find many other things. Actually, the American Constitution is way ahead of those others because those are older. So they know to try to apply the legal systems of 200 years ago, much less 500 years ago, is ludicrous. So now when we say not 500 but 1,400 years, they say you must be insane. That legal system must contain so much that is totally inapplicable today. And not only that, it becomes also rigid and inflexible, like societies like the Amish, right, where you have these ancient Christian groups that had developed in Europe, and then they fled persecution in Europe to America, and they arrived there like in the 16th century, and they're still locked into the 16th century. They still drive around in buggies. They don't use electricity. They're still dressing the same way they dressed, all these kind of things. Locked. So that's what they perceive application of the Sharia as being like. Okay, you Muslims, you still want to do all this cover-up thing, praying the same way, going back to the past and being locked into the past. Can't possibly be applicable to modern society. However, we have also fiqh, which provides the flexibility, making Islamic law with its inflexible foundation applicable in any place, in any time. And I know personally, in the case of my own father, who I had asked to edit a book which I wrote called The Evolution of Fiqh, of the schools of fiqh, schools of Islamic law, the evolution of fiqh. I asked him to edit it for me because he's an English professor. So he went through it and he edited it. In fact, the last chapter of the book he wrote. My book, Evolution of Fiqh, which is quite detailed, he wrote the last chapter. He's a very good editor. But he said after reading it, he was amazed. He said, I didn't have the slightest inkling that Islamic law was so developed. That this thing really was a complete system, because he was thinking, Islam, like Christianity, you had legal systems, but it was dependent on the existing Roman or Greek systems, and it's just given a Christian coat, right? Whereas the Islamic system had its own unique foundation, and it was so developed as to address all aspects of human need. He was just amazed at it. So this is our point of defense, that Islam is applicable anywhere. The foundational principles found in the Quran and the Sunnah, these address issues which do not change in human life. Human beings are the same human beings they were 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago. They were human beings. We don't believe at any time in the past there were monkeys who finally got out of the trees and decided to walk upright. Right? We don't believe that. Human beings were always human beings. And the emotional, psychological, economic, physical needs of human beings have not changed. Yes, society has evolved, so how we meet those needs might change, but the basic needs don't change. So Allah, when He revealed the laws in the Quran and through the Sunnah, He addressed those basic needs which never change. Then the fiqh aspect is for us to deal with those changing aspects of human society and apply Islamic law according to need. So, if we look at Islamic law and how we would apply it, as we approach tafsir, the first thing we do is we go to the Quran. We have an issue that we need to determine and establish a law for. We go to the Quran first and foremost. And if we find a law there, can we say, Alhamdulillah, we've got the law here in the Quran, this is what we will apply, no need to go to the Sunnah? Can we say that? Can we stop here? Is that possible? Tell me. No? Correct. No. It has been mistakenly taught that you go to the Quran. If you find the law in the Quran, finish. No need to go further. If you don't find it in the Quran, then you go to the Sunnah. This is a mistake. When you find it in the Quran, you must go to the Sunnah to get the Prophet's clarification of it. You must go there. You cannot stop. Because if we do that, there are many laws in the Quran which have been the details of which have been clarified in the Sunnah. If you applied it as it existed in the Quran, you would be applying it incorrectly. For example, if we take the laws of food in the Quran, it states there what are the forbidden foods. The animals that are killed by a blow when they fall, and all of this listing, and pork. Then Allah says after that, and whatever is beyond that is halal. So it means we can eat tigers and lions, eagles, and if you take that Quranic text, and you could argue that. However, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, let us not find one of you reclining on a couch, holding up the Quran, saying, whatever I find halal in here, I will make halal. And whatever I find haram in here, I will make haram. Bas, only. Because, as the Prophet ﷺ said, I made things halal and I made things haram which are not found in the book. Meaning that he provided details, further clarification. He is the one who told us we cannot eat domesticated donkeys. Allah said, cut off the hand of the thief. In Arabic, yad can be from your fingertip to your wrist, or from your fingertip to your elbow, or from your fingertip to your armpit. All of that is called yad. So according to us and the Quran, technically if you steal, we can cut off your arm all the way up to your armpit. Furthermore, if what you stole was my pencil, I could also chop off your arm all the way up to your armpit for stealing my pencil. Whereas the Sunnah clarifies that the cutting of the hand is only to the wrist. The Sunnah clarifies that you don't cut off the hand for anything whose value is less than somewhere around $100. Not just for any little thing. Yes, you may punish that person for stealing something whose value is less than the hand cutting value, but you don't cut the hand. So the steps are not independent steps. The Quran and the Sunnah have to come together. We cannot separate them. And we spoke about that before. Just as we said that the Shahada, our declaration of faith, consists of two aspects. La ilaha illallah, there is no God worthy of worship but Allah, the Quran, and Muhammadur Rasulullah. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. That is the Sunnah. Our belief depends on accepting both. So if we find the law in the Quran, we go to the Sunnah to get clarification of the details concerning that law. If we don't find the law in the Quran, we go to the Sunnah to try to find the law. Either way, we go to the Sunnah after going to the Quran. Yes, we'll go to the Quran first. Why? Because it is the most primary source of revelation. Yes, there is priority. Quran is ahead of the Sunnah. But it being ahead doesn't mean you can work with it to the exclusion of the Sunnah. No. Now, whenever the companions, after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, ran into a problem in the time of Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali, when they ran into problems and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was no longer around, they would gather the leading companions and ask them, do you have Or do you know of any verses from the Quran which relate to this problem? Then they would ask, do you know of any hadith, any statements of the Prophet ﷺ to this effect? As in the case of inheritance of the grandmother, there is no mention of inheritance of the grandmother. Or in the case of maintenance for a woman who has been divorced irrevocably. She has 3 divorce pronouncements. Is she maintained during her iddah or not? This is not in the Quran. So when these issues arose, it was brought to Abu Bakr and to Omar, and they asked. Some companion came up and said, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had told us that the grandmother inherits like the mother. If there's no mother, then the grandmother will inherit. And in the case of maintenance for the woman who is irrevocably divorced, Fatima bint Qais, one of the female companions of the Prophet ﷺ, who had been irrevocably divorced, she came forth and said, I asked the Prophet ﷺ concerning maintenance for myself, and he informed us that there is no maintenance. So this was what they would do. Now if after that there were still issues which they could not find in the Quran or the Sunnah, what to do then? They would gather, and each person who had a suggestion, a possible solution, would make his or her suggestion. And if they all agreed upon it, then this became law. This process of coming together, agreeing upon a ruling, this is called ijma'. Ijma'. Now, a person may question, what is the difference between ijma' and democracy? Sounds like democracy here. And didn't you say that Islam is opposed to democracy? If you didn't hear me say it, I do say it. Okay? Islam is opposed to democracy. So what's the difference? This sounds like democracy. They're getting together, the majority opinion that has been agreed upon, it became law. Isn't that what democracy says? Isn't that what happens in democracy? Well, the difference, and there are major differences. People coming together and agreeing upon something, Islam is not against that. In fact, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ related to us from the Quran the verse in which Allah said, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ, and their affair is by consultation amongst them. So the idea of consulting together and agreeing upon things and making decisions, this is part of Islam. But what is the difference then? The difference lies first and foremost in the source of the opinions. Where do the opinions come from? In the case of democracy, opinions can come from anywhere. They are not rooted in any particular tradition, any precedents. They're not rooted. They don't have to be. If homosexuals put enough pressure on the society, then we can take opinions from the homosexuals. Even though all of the laws prior to that time were opposed to homosexuality. But because homosexuals now exert pressure on the society, all of a sudden laws are being made in favor of homosexuals which have no precedence. When we look at Islamic law and how people come together in ijma' to come to decisions, that is not the case. All of those decisions which they made by ijma' had a source in the Quran or the Sunnah or both. They may not have been direct statements, but they were deducible statements, deducible concepts. So it had a root. Also, the laws of democracy are and can be primary laws. They can cancel the laws that were there before them, because no law has sanctity. No law has sanctity, meaning that law was there saying such and such a thing is prohibited. They can get together, agree that it's not. Any law. Nothing is above change. Everything, as they say, is relative. The truth is relative. Good and evil are relative. One man's meat is another man's poison. This is the basis of democratic thought. So therefore, what was pronounced prohibited, pronounced pornography, pronounced immoral, all these things can, in the stroke of a pen, in the instant of a decision, be reversed completely. Be reversed completely. So that means you have no moral foundation for that civilization. No moral foundation. This is why the judgment with regards to human sexual interaction is governed by the principle of consenting adults, as opposed to tradition regarding adultery, fornication, that these things are forbidden by divine revelation, etc., etc. That has no relevance, because that democratic society functions from a secular base, a base which does not recognize religion as having any role to play in education or state policy. It has no place. Therefore, they deduced other principles. So, Islamic decisions made by ijma', they were done using the instrument or the deductive tool of what came to be known as qiyas. Qiyas, deduction by way of analogy. That is, you have an issue you want to deal with, you go back in the Quran and the Sunnah, you find some law which has a reason similar to the one you are trying to deduce a law for. When you have established similitude, you then transfer that law from the Quran and Sunnah to the circumstance that you wish to deal with. This we refer to as qiyas. Now, there are examples given in the notes of laws from the Quran and laws from the Sunnah and how they differ, really pointing out in general that the Quranic laws tended to be more general and the prophetic hadithic laws tended to be more detailed, giving more details about them. And we know in the case of salah, that Allah in the Quran only tells us, establish the salah, aqim as-salah. But He doesn't give us the details of saying takbir, going into ruku', how you go into ruku', how you make sujood, what you should say in sujood. Tasleems, not even mentioned at all. Yes, the term ruku' is mentioned in the Quran, sujood is mentioned in the Quran, but tasleem, not mentioned. Takbir, not mentioned. So much of the salah, in fact 90% of the salah, the methodology of salah, can only be found in the sunnah. That is the evidence for us, sufficient. That the laws of the Quran in general tend to address general instructions or be general instructions, whereas the sunnah tends to give us the details of how these instructions are to be followed out. Now, the laws of the Quran, when we go into how they were taught by Allah, if we look at the body of information in the Quran, scholars divided it up into 3 areas. The first being information related to belief in Allah, Aqidah, the angels, the scriptures, the prophets, and so on and so. This is Aqidah. The second area deals with actions of the heart, moral principles, rules of conduct, and this they refer to as ilmul akhlaq, or ethics, ethical issues. And the third major area has to do with actions of our body parts, what we do in terms of how we interact on an economic level, how we interact on a social level, which have to do with trade and things of this nature. This is the area of the laws, all of the laws governing our what we call mu'amalat, or human interactions, which are not specifically of ethical concern, but what is right and wrong in terms of what we can buy and sell and how we buy and sell and these kind of things. Now, out of that third category, we find that the laws addressing human actions, some of them address man's relationship with Allah, and these are our ritual acts of worship: the prayer, zakah, fasting, hajj, etc. And the others relate to human interactions, how human beings deal with other human beings, and they constitute the laws concerning family, trade, criminal law, and jihad, propagation of Islam, etc. Now, when we look at the basis of legislation in Islam, whether Quranic or Hadithic revelation, the body of Islamic law which came to Arabia, taught by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ through the Quran or the Sunnah, this body of law did not come and erase all of the traditions which existed in the society and replace them with a complete new and different set of laws. No. Because that implies that human beings are incapable of arriving at anything correct. That's what it implies. Or that human beings of the past ever arrived at anything correct which they handed down and people may have maintained. That's what it implies. And this is not the case. So what you find is that Islamic legislation did not come to eradicate what was there, but to correct it, to reform it, to improve it. Where there were practices and principles which were completely wrong from its core, like burying baby girls alive. Okay. There's no reformation of that. That just has to be stopped, period. Those errors, those mistakes that societies fall into, well, yes, Islam seeks to eradicate them completely. Whereas there are other practices which were introduced by earlier prophets, but in time these practices became corrupted, like Hajj. When Prophet Muhammad began to teach Islam in Mecca, Hajj was there. The Arabs used to come from all over Arabia and they made Hajj. But how did they make Hajj? They made Tawaf of the Kaaba stark naked. When they slaughtered the animals, they splashed the blood over themselves and they splashed it on the wall of the Kaaba and on their idols. So Islam came and said, okay, yes, Tawaf should be done, but not stark naked. No, you wear ihram. You wrap something around your waist and something over your shoulders. Right? And when you slaughter the animal, you cook the food, the meat, you eat some of it and you give away some. No need to splash it over yourself and splash it on the car. No. Because the blood and the meat does not go to Allah. It is the piety with which we make these sacrifices which goes to Allah. So, in this case, in the case of practices which were handed down from earlier prophets, these were corrected where corruption creeped in. Furthermore, there were practices which human beings arrived at just through rational thinking. They just thought about this issue or this practice and they said, this is good for us to do, so let us do it. There's no specific revelation we can say said, do this. It was just a custom which developed in an area wherein it was good. The people got benefit from it. Such customs, Islam does not eradicate unless these customs contradict Islamic principles. Where the custom contradicts Islamic principles, yes, you must remove it. Where it doesn't, you can keep it. It doesn't necessarily become a requirement for people to do, but something which is permitted for people to do. Thirdly, if there were areas where the people had a void, they had no teachings or no instructions, then yes, Islamic law came and filled that void. So the Islamic legislative system was reformatory. It reformed society. It brought things in order. It did not seek to destroy, to replace everything. No. It sought to correct, remove those things which are evil, those things which are connected to shirk, things which are against Islamic teachings, it corrects those things, those practices. And it fills the void where there is a need. And what you see, when you look at the characteristics of Islamic law, you find in there that there's the principle of removal of difficulty is fundamental. So many of the laws either correct certain practices and remove certain obligations that were there and provide people with an easier mode, or whenever Allah gives an instruction, He also gives modified versions to deal with, to use in times of difficulty. Just like fasting, when you're traveling, you're excused. Salah, when you're traveling, reduced. Right? All of these major principles, we see all of the instructions, a release valve is always there. Allah prohibits us from eating pork, period. But if you're starving to death, you're allowed to eat enough to survive. That is the nature of Islamic law. You need to make wudu, but there is no water. Tayammum. You need to pray to Mecca, but you have no compass. If you can see the sun, you can figure out where north is, south is, east and west. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said to his companions in Medina, because they didn't have compasses, he said to them, Medina being to the north of Mecca, he said, what is between the east and the west, facing south, is Qibla for you. What is between the east and the west is Qibla for you. ما بين المشرق والمغرب قبلة لكم. That is enough. The ease is there. So if 20 years ago or 50 years ago a masjid was built in your community, and to the best of your ability you turn and set up the masjid facing what appeared to you to be the direction of Qibla, which according to the flat map is southeast. Then MSA came along some years later and they said, well, you know, actually this flat map is not the way to figure out where Mecca is. You have to go according to the globe. And if you take a string from America and you put it to Mecca on a globe, the shortest distance is northeast. Now you have set up your masjid, everything is set up in this way. Do you now have to come and realign everything so your rows which were complete when you faced southeast now become incomplete and broken and all? No, you don't have to. If you decide to do it, you can, but it is not a requirement. It is enough that you face the direction, the general direction, within 180 degrees. That is sufficient. It's an important principle, because you have people who come through, you know. If you have ever lived in an area where you've had your masjid for a long period of time and different groups and people come through, you know, after this northeast thing came the Qibla compasses. You know, people will come through now and they put the compass on the ground after you've gone and lined up things according to MSA, and they say, hey, you're 3 degrees off. You know, so okay, here we go again. Shift the lines another 3 degrees. Then somebody comes along and they bring a new compass, the most advanced version of the compass, right? And they say, oh, you're still 4 degrees off. So here we go again. Right? The reality is that if we miss the Qibla by 0.0001 degree from here, we have missed the Kaaba by miles. We are not required to go to that depth of accuracy. The only time that we need to be on the Kaaba, right, exactly, is when we're in Mecca and we see the Kaaba. This is the time when it is haram for you to face any other direction. Haram. Your salah is not accepted. If you see the Kaaba in front of you and you pray to the left, your salah is nullified. Other than that, the general direction is sufficient. What about Amir Sultan, the Saudi prince who went up in the space shuttle? 7 days he was circling the earth, and according to what he said, he prayed his 5 times daily prayer whilst he was up there. This is Islam. What do you think he was, how do you think he was facing the Kaaba? Okay? What about when we get to the moon? Muslims, if human beings ever colonize the moon and Muslims set up a community up there, what are they going to do? You see, Islam is practical. The difficulty has been removed. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he prayed in Medina when there was no rain, no circumstance or need for him to join prayers. He prayed Zuhr and Asr together and prayed Maghrib and Isha together in Medina. He wasn't traveling. And the companions explained, and this is in Sahih Muslim, he explained that the Prophet ﷺ did that to remove haraj or difficulty from the ummah. So this is an option that we have, where you find yourself in a situation, you leave the house, you've got something you have to go and do, and you know you will not be able to get to a masjid or get to a place where you can pray Asr on time. You're going to miss it. What you do is, before you leave, you pray your Asr along with your Dhuhr. You pray Dhuhr first. When you finish, you pray Asr. You're a brain surgeon or a heart surgeon. You've got a 5-hour operation ahead of you. You're starting at Dhuhr time. You cannot, when Asr time comes, stop the operation and say, hold on for a minute, let me go make my Asr and I'll come back and join you. Hey, that person may be dead. You know, this operation is a continual thing. You have to stay on it. So Islam has provided that ease. You can join the prayers. So we don't have any excuse where you have people, for example, praying their 5 times daily before they go to bed. They don't pray all day long, but just before they go to bed, they get down and pray all 5 prayers and then they go to sleep. No, this is not Islam. This is not Islam. Yes, there is ease, but it is not according to our own desire. We just do it anyhow. No, there are principles here. There are principles. So in every area of Islamic law where there are prohibitions, there are strict orders, there is also ease. A basic characteristic of Islamic legislation. Added to that is the concept of reduction of religious obligation. If you look at the Jewish legal system, where they have laws for everything like we do. Their laws are incredibly detailed. You find the Islamic laws has reduced much of those obligations down to major areas. So when somebody says to you, you know, this religion of yours, Islam, so many laws, I want for everything. You can do, you can't do, you can't do, you can't do, you can't eat this, you can't do that, you can't go here. So many laws, your life is so restricted. Where is the freedom? Where's the freedom? Well, we say, well, what do you mean by freedom? Freedom to do anything you want? Is there a society on the earth where you're free to do anything you want? Or does every society have laws? Yes, every society has laws. So there's no place where you are free. Everywhere there are restrictions. And in fact, the things which are prohibited in Islam are few. If you add up all of the prohibited foods and then you look at all of the permitted foods, hey, the prohibited is only a drop in an ocean, a very small amount. What is permitted is far greater. And that's the reality. The obligations which Allah prescribes for us, they are few. Now, what we find when we look in these obligations is that they are for the general welfare of society. They are for the general welfare of society. You see in the Islamic legal pronouncements that human need, human welfare is addressed. So that when somebody comes to you and they say, you know, it says in the newspaper that the doctors from years ago, and they repeat it every so often, doctors have pointed out that if you drink half a glass of wine with your meal, it helps with digestion. It helps in digesting your food. This is fact. It's a medical fact. Furthermore, some have even argued that those who drink that half a glass of wine with their meals, it reduces the chances for heart attack. It's reduced. So that's very nice. However, if we put those benefits, help in digestion, reduced chances of heart attack by point so and so and so and so percent, minute reduction, then we put on the other hand the devastation caused by the use of alcohol in society, we have to say that benefit is of no value. Better we don't consider that benefit at all. It is of no value when you compare it to the harm. The harm is so overwhelmingly great that that benefit is insignificant. And again, some people will say, okay, we can understand that. However, the harm which comes from alcohol is when people drink in excess. If I only drink my glass of wine with my meal, why do you want to prohibit me from drinking? I will not drinking and getting drunk and killing people with my car or committing heinous crimes, etc. Why are you going to prohibit me? Prohibit those who abuse it. And anything which is abused becomes bad. It's a line of reasoning. What we say, if we were to make the law such that those people who drink in excess are prohibited from drinking alcohol, and those who will drink moderately are allowed, do you think anybody is going to admit that they will drink in excess? Of course not. Everybody will say, yeah, we're moderate drinkers. We'll be moderate. This is something pleasurable. Everybody will want to enjoy it. But the reality is that for the vast majority of people, when they drink, no matter how moderate they are, sometime they become drunk. At some time they will become drunk. You ask the most moderate of drinkers, have you ever become drunk in your life? They will tell you yes, if they're honest. Because though you may be a moderate drinker, all it takes is an incident in your life where you become down, you feel bad, something happened, and then you, that moderate drinker, now drink to excess. And all it takes is once, and you become an enemy to society. Where the most heinous of crimes are committed in states of intoxication. When you read about a father raping his 4-year-old daughter, and you say, God, how could somebody do this? He was intoxicated. This is why Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Khamru Ummul Khaba'ith. Intoxicants are the source or the mother